Grandpa was sitting on the back porch, the 12-pack I had bought, looking decidedly emptier. Glimmer had stopped by for a bit, wanting to see me and tell me about the wedding plans, before going off to hunt to fulfill her duty as the first hunter. Grandpa had been patient, but it appeared he had definitely started without me. "Geez, Gramps, are there any left?" He laughed, holding the empty by the neck before tossing it into the woods, where I heard it shatter against a tree. "Of course. I left you 6. This is only my 3rd, or is it my 4th? I shook my head. "Gramps, why do you do that?" "Do what?" he asked, taking a sip from the 3rd or 4th and smacking his lips. "Toss the bottles into the woods like that. Can't be good for nature, and you and I tromp around out there too often for you to be littering glass everywhere." He cackled like I'd said the funniest thing ever. "Son, have you ever found so much as a shard of glass out there?" "I suppose I haven't," I said, thinking about it. "And you never will. The broken bottles are my gift to the fairies, and they love them very much." I was speechless for a moment. "The fairies?" "Mm-hmm. You break bottles in the woods for the fairies." I tell you, my friend turned into a tree. We fight a creature made of bones, and you're preparing to marry a gorgeous half-fey woman. But that is where you draw the line." I shrugged. I think it's easier to just assume you like the sound they make when they hit the trees. Grandpa scoffed. "It is pretty satisfying. That's why I started doing it. That and your great-grandfather. But no, I kept doing it because of the little people. At least, after they showed themselves. I'm a friend of the Fae, you know. They hold me in high regard, and all because I smashed some bottles on the edge of my property." "Well," I said, popping the top on my first, "this I gotta hear." Grandpa laughed. "It was a warm night, just like this one. I was sitting on this very porch when I was suddenly summoned to the court of the fairies." I knew of the Fae, of course. Grandma had told me a lot about them, and I knew that they could be tricky and dangerous. I never caught lightning bugs, I never disturbed fairy rings, and if I felt like I was watched in the forest, I never stuck around. Grandma had always told me that the Fae were a wealth of information, if they could be made to speak. This usually meant a bargain of some sort, but I had unwittingly built up a great deal of credit with these little creatures, and all by a little casual littering. My father, you see, your great-grandfather, had always tossed his cans and bottles into the tree line. It was a different age, and we didn't quite know what we were doing to our beautiful Appalachian countryside just yet. Dad and I would sit on the back porch sometimes, him with his glass, a can of beer, and me with my Aussie cola, and tell stories or just talk about our day. As he finished, Dad would always yell, "Bombs away," and throw the can or bottle into the tree line. He would laugh and make it sound like a big joke, so I started doing it too. Now, much like you just realized, I started to notice that I never found any glass out there. Dad always tossed his garbage in the same place, and sometimes my mom, your great-grandmother, would make me go out there with a rake and clean up the mess. Well, I never did find any glass or cans out there, and I quickly learned to just busy around a bit and then dump the pine needles in the garbage, so she thought I'd found the glass. Her scolding never stopped him from doing it, and it was a habit I kept into adulthood. So, one evening, as I was sitting on the porch and making my way through a six-pack, something comes streaking out of the woods and lands on the railing of the porch. I managed to do 2 things before I saw what it was. The first being I fell over and spilled beer on myself, and the second being I pulled together a shield in front of me, just in case it was dangerous. What it was a small creature in a waistcoat, stockings, little pilgrim shoes, and a powdered wig. It looked like a kid's toy, some kind of French Revolution Barbie or something, and as I got back in my chair, it unrolled a little scroll, cleared its throat, and began to read in a voice like a bumblebee having a stroke.
Her Royal Highness, Lady Jezavina of the Rolling Forest, has extended to you, Sir Benefactor, an invitation to her royal gala tonight, to mark the completion of her royal palace and grand cathedral. What say you, Sir Benefactor?
He asked, looking past the scroll and seeming to realize I was sitting half in my chair and was very disheveled.
Are you quite well, sir? You seem to have soiled yourself.
I did no such thing, I shot back. You scared me plumb to death, and I spilled beer on me. What's this all about, Sir Benefactor? I don't remember making a donation to no dang fairies. The little messenger looked up his nose at me and stamped his foot almost daintily as he responded,
Those of the Fey realm do not appreciate that word. Furthermore, you are the benefactor of the lady's court, whether you know it or not. She is holding a gala tonight and has asked for your attendance. This is quite an honor. Shall I tell her that you will attend?
I started to say no, but hell, how many chances do you get to go to a fairy party? I suppose I will. Can you wait for me to put on something that doesn't smell like beer? I don't know the way.
Certainly,
the little fella intoned.
I shall return in a quarter of an hour. Be here and ready to depart, please.
Then he shot off into the woods, and I went back inside to get my things. Your grandma was sitting by the fire, reading one of those lady fantasy books with a half-naked fella on the cover, and looked up as I came in, smirking. "Did you get tired of listening to the woods already?" she asked, wrinkling her nose as she smelled the beer on me. "Jesus, Jack, you smell like a distillery. I thought you were going out to drink a beer, not wallow in it." "Never mind that," I said, smiling at her. "I've been invited to a fancy gala in about 15 minutes. You want to come with me?" Your grandma thought about it, finally nodding and putting her book away. "How fancy are we talking?" I thought about it. Sunday social ought to be, but we gotta hurry. The guide said he would definitely leave us if we didn't. About 10 minutes later, we were both out on the porch and something sensible yet nice, and our guide was tapping his foot impatiently.
"Follow me, if you please,"
he said, flying off slowly towards the woods. I don't have to tell you that your grandma was quite speechless. She had seen some weird things, the goat creature, some forest things, even Glimmer on one occasion, but she'd never seen a fairy. Heck, I had never seen a fairy either till that night, but when I offered her my arm, she came along. "Is that what I think it is?" she asked quietly, like she might offend him. "Sure looks like one," I whispered back. "Did you know they were real?" I just shook my head as she gingerly stepped into the tree line behind him. "I do hope you haven't been throwing beer bottles out here tonight. If I come down on glass and cut my foot, the only place we're likely to be going is the hospital." Your grandmother didn't think much of my bottle throwing either, but the thought of broken glass was soon the farthest thing from my mind. The deeper we went, the more our guide began to push the branches and roots aside. The ground smoothed as we passed, the trees bent away from our path, and I was pretty sure he made a couple of them get out of the way entirely. Your grandma took it all with rapt amazement, and I noticed her dress wasn't covered with hitchhikers or cockleburs, which I so often picked up on my hikes. I had chosen a button-up shirt, slacks, pairing them with some hiking boots, since I had figured on more strenuous circumstances. The animals never stilled at our passing, and as we went, I began to notice lights ahead. Soon those lights were around us too, and it was like 100,000 fireflies had taken up an honor guard around us. Those lights were the Fae, and I saw ball gowns and sequined attire that made us look downright drab. There was flowing hairdos as well, and luminescent wings like those on a dragonfly. It reminded me of a page I had seen in an old picture book when I was very young, The Gathering of Spring, and I expected to see Queen Mab or Queen Titania float by in a tiny carriage pulled by sparkling horses. They floated around us, showing deference I did not believe that we had earned. But it wasn't until we got closer to that dazzling light show up ahead that I began to cotton to the situation of my benefactordom. Our guide was approached by a chunky fella, but as I got closer, I realized it was Armor. He and his winged cohort were dressed in armor that had been fashioned from aluminum cans, cutting holes for their wings and limbs and smoothing them out a little bit so they weren't quite so ungainly. He threw me a salute, the little guy standing almost on my nose, and thanked me for my donation of materials for the squad's armor and weapons. Then I noticed it right there on his chest. It was a Pabst Blue Ribbon logo. These little fairies were wearing my old beer cans. How many of your men have I outfitted, if you don't mind me asking? I said curiously. Sir, the lady recognizes you for outfitting her entire guard, all 120 of us, and another 50 of her retainers. You have been instrumental in our efforts to retake the southern berry patches from the centipedes and the hornets. This armor saved my life last year, he said, tapping a fist over a dent that had been repaired. And whomever this Pap is, he must be a fine smith. I had to stop myself from laughing, and your grandmother hid hers well. They flew off then, and your grandma bumped me on my shoulder. Well, I guess all that drinking helped out after all. I just thought you were the nicest alcoholic I had ever seen. I smiled. Guess that's why they invited us. Maybe they wanted to thank us for benefiting their war effort. I was in for a bigger surprise, however. As we came through a copse of trees and into a small clearing, I saw a large and impressive Fey town that looked right out of a history book. They had been industrious, it seemed, because the streets were cobbled, the roofs were thatched, and most of the houses had windows. Just past the little town was a castle, and it was beautiful. It was made mostly of stone, but I saw a lot of glass and many colors at that. There were greens and browns and reds and blues, and some of them looked very familiar. The crowd of flying little folk had led us to a fair in progress near the outskirts, and that was where I met the Lady of the Fae. These were dewdrop fairies, I would later learn, but she remains one of the most beautiful creatures I have ever seen. Beside the fairground was a new cathedral, and the whole roof seemed to be made of glass. They had worked the broken edges into other broken edges, and the whole place looked like it would glimmer in the sun. I imagined it probably got a little warm too, but I guess if that was what they wanted, then it was their cathedral to make. The spires were similarly worked, the windows looking like stained glass fit for any cathedral, and I laughed when it hit me. This was why they wanted to honor me. They had built this place with my unknowing help. "Ah, you came," said the little ruler. "I had hoped you would. For years we have been using your gifts to help our people, and we thought it was time you were thanked properly. Is this your wife that you bring before us? We are honored to meet her as well, and we wish both of you many happy years." She told me how the winters had been cruel to them, and their kingdom had been so drab. But then, one day, they began finding my offerings of glass and metal by the woodline. They had been angry at first, thinking it was trash or a trap for them. But soon they took those offerings and made them into glass for their windows, ornaments for their home, and outfitted their warriors for battle in the metal I left behind. Such wondrous metal! We Fae do not tolerate iron, but this metal did not burn us. So we took it and worked it, and it protects our warriors from thorns and stings and the weapons of our enemies. We have grown and become stronger because of you, and we want to thank you for your generosity." That night, they named me a Fae friend, and I promised to keep leaving my gifts by the tree line for them. And so that's how I became a fairy friend, and why I toss my bottles and cans by the wood line to this very day. I laughed as he finished. I couldn't help myself. Are you saying that the fairies take all the broken glass and old beer bottles away and thank you for it? Grandpa nodded. To this very day, I get thank you gifts from time to time. I have a very smart letter opener that they left on the porch once, and a bottle of pure honey they collected for me one year. I have been invited back a few times, but it gets harder to make it all the way each time, and I have sent my polite refusal the last few times. He got up slowly, wobbling a little. And now, if you'll excuse me, I think it's time I went to get my next offering to the little folks. I smiled, shaking my head as he went inside. Grandpa was full of surprises. It wasn't until I heard a small crash from inside that I realized my night wasn't as peaceful as I had believed. I went running back in, but by then it was too late to do much more than call an ambulance. Grandpa had fallen down, and it looked like he was going to need more than a hand up this time. You're still here. Thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague here. Always a pleasure to see all my new and old viewers coming by for another one of my spooky tales. If you'd like to support the show, you can always take part in one of our channel offers through Fume or Aura, or you can just click on another video when they come up. I'd really appreciate it. For our newer viewers, we also have lots of playlists and other things if you'd like to get caught up. I know some of my series have been going on for quite a while. If you'd like to get my latest book, there's a link down below that'll take you to my Amazon page. Towesey Homestead just came out, so if that's something you'd like to get your hands on, go ahead and have a look down there. If you'd like a signed copy, you can go ahead and email me from my email address on the site, and I'll get with you about shipping information and ship you a signed copy. If you'd like to support the channel in a more monetary fashion, we also have membership through YouTube, and we've got a Patreon that you can get the information for in the description. We have lots of tiers and everything to suit your needs. Patrons that support on the $10 tier, that's our Ghostly Reader tier, get a book anytime I write one, signed and on their doorstep. As you may have noticed, there's a list of patrons and members on the screen, and I'd like to personally thank every one of them for taking a hand in the future of this channel. Well, that's enough for tonight. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.